Back in the fall of 2016, I got my first job at Eaton. It wasn't too glamorous, just a cashier gig at a 24-hour grocery store, but at that age, it felt like the start of independence. The weather had just started to cool down. The air smelled faintly like wood smoke, and the leaves were turning red and orange across the streets. I'd finish my shift around midnight, walk out into that chilly air, and feel both proud and exhausted. The only thing I didn't love was the drive home. 30 minutes each way through long, quiet country roads, no lights, no houses, just endless trees and the hum of tires on asphalt. My mom had given me one piece of advice before I started: keep an eye on your gas tank. And if you need to fill up, do it before work, not after. I understood why. I was a small 18-year-old girl, barely looked my age, and my mom worried about the idea of me stopping alone at some gas station in the dark. But being 18 and maybe a little too confident, I didn't think much of it. Then came the night I wish I had listened. It was late October, the kind of night where the fog rolls in low and the wind carries the smell of wet leaves. The store had been busier than usual, and by the time I clocked out, my eyes burned from the fluorescent lights. I got into my car, turned the heat on, and started the drive home. About 10 minutes in, I noticed the gas light blink on. It wasn't just low, it was nearly empty. My stomach sank. My mom's words echoed in my head, but there was no way I'd make it home without stopping. The next gas station I saw was small and half-lit, one of those run-down ones that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s, the kind with one flickering sign, a dusty window, and a single bored attendant behind the counter. I pulled in anyway. The lot was empty, and the only sound was the hum of the overhead lights and the rustle of the wind sweeping old leaves across the concrete. I figured I'd just put in $10 worth, enough to get home and leave. I swiped my card, started pumping, and watched the numbers climb. 7、8美元9.10. I stopped, pulled out the nozzle, and grabbed my receipt. Easy. Then, just as I was about to open my car door, I heard it, a voice crackling through the intercom above the pump. "Ma'am, there was a problem with your card payment." I froze. I glanced at the station window and saw the clerk staring right at me. He was tall, pale, almost gaunt-looking, and he was waving for me to come inside. Immediately, something felt off. I pressed the button on the intercom and said, "What's wrong with my card?" "I have a receipt. It went through." His voice came back, a little too quickly. "Your receipt is incorrect, ma'am. I need you to come inside so I can rerun the payment." I glanced down at the paper in my hand. It looked normal. My card app even pinged me for the charge. I looked back at him. His expression was strange. He wasn't angry. He looked nervous. "Yeah, I'm not coming in," I said flatly. He leaned forward toward the glass, still motioning for me. His lips were moving now, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. I started to feel a pit forming in my stomach. That S when he suddenly pressed something against the inside of the window, a piece of paper. I squinted to read it. It said, "Guy in your car." My entire body froze. For a few seconds, I couldn't move. I slowly turned and looked through my car window. From where I stood, the back seat looked dark, just a shadowy blur behind the driver's seat. I told myself he had to be joking. But the fear in his eyes, it wasn't fake. Without thinking, I ran inside the gas station. The clerk locked the door behind me the second I got through, and he told me to get down. He had one hand on the phone and the other gripping something under the counter, a small revolver. I ducked behind the counter, shaking uncontrollably. We both stared at the security screen. There it was. A tall man in sweatpants and a windbreaker slowly opened my back door, the one behind the driver's seat. He slipped out silently, closed it halfway, and jogged off into the dark woods beside the station. The clerk had seen him earlier, lurking near the trash bins. He said the guy had crouched down and waited until I pulled up. Then, the moment I started swiping my card, he slid into my car, careful not to close the door all the way, so I wouldn't hear it click. If I had driven off, I would have been trapped in a moving car with him. The police came within minutes. They searched my car, the woods, and the nearby road, but there was no trace of the man. No fingerprints, no footprints, nothing. The officer said, "You probably saved your own life by trusting your gut, but it wasn't really my gut that saved me. It was that clerk, the same one I thought looked creepy." When everything calmed down, I thanked him. He just looked at me and said, "Always check your back seat." Then he went back to watching the monitors. I quit that job a few months later, but I still remember that night every time the air turns cold and the leaves just start to fall. Even now, when I get into my car, I glance behind me before starting the engine. Because sometimes what's hiding in the dark, IS&T supernatural, is just waiting for you to forget to look. I work at a gas station in the backwoods of Tennessee, and after what happened a few nights ago, I don't think I'll ever step foot in that place again. For a bit of context, the road this station sits on used to be a main route through town, but about 10 years ago, they built a new freeway that rerouted almost all the traffic. Since then, every business on this road has shut down, leaving behind a bunch of empty, rotting buildings that local druggies and drifters sometimes use to crash in. It's quiet out there. Too quiet most nights. When I clocked in for my shift around 8 p.m., it was dead silent, not a single car on the road, not even the hum of distant trucks. Just that kind of thick, empty silence that makes you feel like you're the last person on earth. I'm 18, and my boss usually lets me run the place alone at night. It's not bad. I can listen to music, scroll on my phone, as long as I get my work done. Around 11, I realized we were almost out of barbecue chips, which meant I'd have to go down into the basement to grab another box. Now, I hate that basement. It's this old, damp concrete room with one flickering light and shelves of cleaning supplies, snacks, and soda. It always smells like wet cardboard and rust. The stairs creak so loud that every step echoes for a few seconds. I've told my boss before that the place gives me bad vibes, but he just laughed it off. Still, I grabbed the key and started heading down. I was about halfway to the bottom when I heard something. It sounded like a box falling, then footsteps. Slow, heavy, dragging footsteps, moving across the floor toward the base of the stairs. I froze. My flashlight beam shook in my hand. The footsteps stopped. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing. Then something scraped against the floor, like a shoe twisting on concrete. That was enough for me. I bolted up the stairs, slammed the basement door shut, and locked it. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely breathe. I ran to the front counter and pulled up the security feed on the store computer. There was one camera in the basement, mounted in the corner near the ceiling. When I clicked on it, my stomach dropped. There was a man standing directly beneath it. He was looking up, staring straight into the lens as if he knew I was watching. He wasn't moving, just smiling. His grin was wide, stretched almost unnaturally, and his eyes looked wrong, too open, too calm. He was looking up, staring straight into the lens, as if he knew I was watching. He wasn't moving, just smiling. His grin was wide, stretched almost unnaturally, and his eyes looked wrong, too open, too calm. He wasn't one of the local junkies either. This guy was clean-shaven, wearing jeans and a button-up shirt. Honestly, if he'd walked into the store, I wouldn't have thought twice. But seeing him down there, alone in the dark basement, smiling into the camera, it made my blood run cold. I called my boss right away. At first, he sounded annoyed that I was calling in the middle of the night, but when he heard how shaken I was, his tone changed. He told me to lock the main doors and stay inside. He said he'd be there in 15 minutes. I asked if I should call the cops, but he said no, not yet. So I locked the front door and went back to the monitor. The man was still standing there, still smiling at the camera. Minutes passed. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. I was terrified he'd start walking toward the stairs again. And then he did something worse. He stepped backward, out of the camera's frame. That's when I lost it. I grabbed the bat we keep under the counter and just stood there, staring at the door to the basement, waiting for any sign of movement or noise. When my boss finally arrived, shotgun in hand, I almost cried with relief. He didn't even hesitate. He went straight to the basement. I followed, staying close behind him. But when we got down there, the place was empty. Every box was where it should be. The air was still. The light flickered, but there was no one. No trace of anyone ever being there. We checked the camera feed again, but now it was just static. The video had glitched out after I called him. My boss told me I was probably tired, maybe imagining things. But I know what I saw. The man's face, that smile, it's burned into my mind. The part that really gets me, though, when I came in the next night, my boss said he went back down there earlier that morning to check again. He didn't find anyone, but one of the boxes, the one labeled BBQ chips, had been dragged across the floor and left at the bottom of the stairs. I swear, I didn't do that. And now, every time I'm down there, I can't shake the feeling that he's still there, just out of sight, smiling in the dark. It was late fall. That time of year when the air feels heavy with cold and the mornings are still dark when you head home. I worked the overnight shift at a warehouse just outside of town, and every morning around 6, I'd stop by the Chevron on my way home to grab my son a snack for school. It was part of my routine, pull into the dimly lit parking lot, grab a juice box and a pack of mini donuts, maybe a coffee for myself. Simple, peaceful. There was always this woman standing outside the gas station, right near the ice machine. She looked homeless, maybe mid-40s, bundled in layered clothes, a torn beanie, always staring off into the distance. But she never bothered anyone, never asked for money, never said a word. Out of kindness or maybe guilt, I started buying her a juice, a bottle of water, and a small snack each morning. She'd take it with a quiet nod, sometimes a faint smile, and that was that. But one morning, things felt different. The air was colder than usual. My breath came out in little white clouds as I handed her the things I bought, and that's when she finally spoke. Her voice was low, calm, but something about it froze me in place. She said, "When the light turns green, wait before going." I blinked, confused. Maybe I even laughed a little awkwardly. Okay, I said. "Yes, ma'am." She didn't explain. Just looked at me. Not crazy, not angry, just serious. I got in my car and drove off, still thinking about it. A few minutes later, I pulled up to the red light right across from the Chevron. The sky was just starting to turn orange, that pale morning glow over wet asphalt. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still see her, standing outside the store, facing me. The light turned green. And for some reason, I didn't go. I hesitated. The car next to me didn't. An 18-wheeler came flying through the intersection, ran the red light full speed. It hit the car beside me head-on. It was instant. Metal folded in on itself. Glass sprayed across the road, the sound echoing in my chest. 4 people gone. Just like that. If I had gone when the light turned green, it would have been me. I looked back toward the gas station. The woman was still there, watching me. Then she turned and slowly walked behind the building. The next morning, after my shift, I stopped by again. But she wasn't there. I went inside, grabbed my coffee, and asked the clerk if he'd seen the woman who usually stood outside. He looked at me funny, then said, "You mean the lady who used to hang around here years ago? The one who died in that wreck?" I froze. "What wreck?" I asked. He told me. She was hit by a drunk driver. At that same intersection, I walked out of the store in a daze. The morning looked the same. Gray skies, cold air, the smell of fuel and wet leaves. Everything felt normal again. But the next morning, when I stopped at that same red light, I glanced at my side mirror, and for a split second, I saw her. Standing by the ice machine, watching. The light turned green, and I waited.